In the chapters of Huckleberry Finn that you read for this week, our main characters leave the town of St. Petersburg and the nearby islands and begin their adventures proper. It's weird that even during the course of these lectures and in class, we're referring to the story as Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn. The full title of the novel is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, so we gotta include those adventures into the discussion as well, I guess. And it's interesting that Huck's journey has almost seamlessly joined itself to Jim's at this point. Because for Huck, when you think about it, his journey or his adventures should basically be about over. All he wanted to do was get away from Pap and to get away from the widow and the rest of the society in St. Petersburg. Mission accomplished. But now Jim's problems have become his own. Jim needs to get to a free state without being captured. And so there's actually a forward trajectory to his story. Conflict, danger, and so on. And Huck has taken it upon himself to make Jim's dangers his own, without even seeming to know that he's actually done it. I think it's very telling that when Huck learns that men are coming to search out Jackson Island where they're hiding, he wakes up Jim and he says, "Jim, get up. They're after us." After us. So we can see that a friendship is already formed between the two of them. They're sort of in it together. And also think about how much Jim is having to trust Huck here. Think about the position that he's in. He's a grown man relying on the help and on the wits of an illiterate boy in order to get to freedom. And if he's caught, it's not going to be pleasant for him. The consequences are going to be very dire. So the fact that he trusts Huck as much as he does is a testament to how he views their friendship as well. Now, as they begin their journey in earnest, we see in these chapters that there are several moments where Huck is forced to grow up. Up until this point, he's been somewhat of an innocent character, living in a world of make-believe with Tom Sawyer and the other boys. He likes to pull pranks on people just to have a laugh. He tries to pull off crazy schemes that no level-minded adult would imagine would work. But this is how children are. They kind of live in their own heads and their own imaginations. But in these chapters, we see Huck having to either abandon these childhood notions or to adapt them into more mature plans in the adult world. So he pulls several pranks on Jim, you might have noticed. And he's used to doing that because we read back at the very beginning of the novel that Huck and Tom pull a prank on Jim while he's asleep. So that's just a regular part of life. But now, each time he pulls a prank on Jim, something bad happens. Once, Jim ends up getting bit by a snake, and another time he just gets so mad that Huck feels bad for what he's done. And he feels that, he needs to go and apologize. And then he vows to himself that he's going to let the pranks lie from then on. And we can applaud him for this as the readers. Yes, of course. You're on this dangerous journey with important real-world consequences. You shouldn't be pulling pranks like that just for fun, like you might have in the past. But this is something that Huck has to learn. A check is put to his carelessness and curiosity as well. When they pass by a sinking ship on the river, and they explore it only because Huck knows that Tom Sawyer would have done it. And again, on a dangerous journey, it doesn't make sense to take unnecessary risks like this. It's a very childish thing to do. But he does, and he talks Jim into taking the risk too, and they almost get killed and lose their raft for doing so. They come across some murderers and just barely escape them. And I think it's interesting that of all the people they could stumble across on a sinking ship, it is a band of murderers who are talking about killing one of their own. Here are the real robbers, not the pretend gang that Huck and Tom pretended to be a part of. Here, Huck can see firsthand the horrors and the cruelty of the life that he and the other boys had imagined that they could fit in with and tried to participate in. But even so, even as he kind of recoils from this vision of thievery and the life of a robber, Huck is still able to empathize with him. Once he and Jim escape the sinking ship, he decides that, you know what, even murderers deserve some pity, which is a nice sentiment. He says, I begun to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I says to myself, there ain't no tellin' but I might come to be a murderer myself. Yet, and then, how would I like it? So I says to Jim, the first light we see will land 100 yards below it or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff. And then I'll go and fix up some kind of a yarn and get somebody to go for that gang and get them out of their scrape, so they can be hung when the time comes. So that last little bit there kind of throws a questionable light on everything he's been thinking before. He's still a bit confused morally. He doesn't mind the murderers being killed by the law. He doesn't mind them being hung, but he wants to save them from drowning, and he thinks he's being considerate in doing so and reserving them for the justice of the law. He's thinking of others, just not all that well. The episode where Huck dresses up like a girl and goes into the town for information is also very revealing. This is the sort of scheme that a child would imagine working, but it doesn't fool a grown woman for a second. Huck tries to talk his way out of getting caught, but he ends up rather abashed and having to admit that he's a boy in disguise. So again, all of these examples demonstrate that Huck is having to leave childish things in the past. He's having to mature and to enter into the adult world. And he's also having to rely on his own moral judgment and reasoning now that he's out on his own. We've seen how he's unquestioningly assumed the virtues and the vices of the other people in town, not stopping to think about whether slavery is good or bad, for instance. But now he has to examine these things for himself. In chapter 16, and what I think is one of the more important scenes, Huck's conscience suddenly tells him that he's doing a bad thing in helping Jim to escape. He thinks about how it's a mean, low thing to do to Mrs. Watson, and when Jim says that he was planning to rescue his wife and his children as well, he thinks about what a mean thing it is to do to their owners too. And he struggles with this for a whole day. We read in chapter 16, I couldn't get that out of my conscience. Excuse me for a minute. The dialect threw me there for a sec. He says, I couldn't get that out of my conscience. No how nor no way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. It hadn't ever come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself that I weren't to blame because I didn't run Jim off from his rightful owner. But it weren't no use. Conscience up and says every time, but you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody. That was so. I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. And he says a little bit further down, I got to feeling so mean and so miserable I most wished I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the raft, abusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. We neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and says, Des Cairo, it went through me like a shot, and I thought if it was Cairo, which meant Jim would be free, I reckoned I would die of miserableness. Jim goes on to talk about how he's going to hire an abolitionist to free his wife and his children. And Huck says, I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever. Until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. So, this is a moral conundrum for Huck, and it's one that might seem absurd to us as modern readers because we understand slavery as something that's inherently evil. But to Huck, it's a real moment of moral confusion. And he talks about his conscience as if it's some sort of a wrestler or a boxer that's subcoming him and overdoing him. He says, my conscience won't let up on me. It's pinching me. I'm saying, let up, but it won't do it. Well, his opportunity to turn Jim in comes and passes, and he decides that he can't do it. After he tricks some men into going away so that they don't discover Jim, he says this. They went off, and I got aboard the raft feeling bad and low, because I knowed very well I had done wrong, and I see it warn't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothing to back him up and keep him to his work, and so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute and says to myself, hold on, suppose you'd have done right and give Jim up. Would you felt better then than what you do now? No, says I, I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now. Well then, says I, what's the use of you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right, and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same? I was stuck. I couldn't answer that, so I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it. But after this was always do whichever come handiest at the time. So, this is interesting, right? Because Huck still isn't quite sure that what he's done is the right thing. He says he feels low, and he still feels like he's committed some sort of a sin. But he's made a decision on his own now, and he's standing by it. He says, I was going to feel bad if I turned Jim in. I was going to feel bad if I didn't. So I'm just going to do what seems right to me, even if, for all I know, it's wrong. We'll revisit this issue later on in the novel, because Huck kind of comes back to this question later. So, this week's readings end with their raft getting destroyed. In a really vivid description, we read about how a steamboat basically runs them down without even bothering to stop. And so we'll pick up the narrative from there next time. Thanks.